Hi, and welcome to the first of our Platform Insight Thought Leadership video series. I'm Nicola Hayes, Chief Marketing Officer at Platform Markets Group and Director of Platform Insight. I am so delighted to be here with Guy Willner today. So I worked it out, and I think it must be 25 years now. We've known each other, 2000.
Yeah, I think so.
It's been a long, long time.
Right.
And I'm really, really, really pleased that you agreed to come and have this chat with me, because this came off the back of a trip back from the wonderful PTC back in January, where we went off-piste and decided to escape PAs and escape an airport and had a chat about your experiences in Russia.
Very nice fish restaurant in LA, yeah.
It's amazing. So you have agreed to give us the insight into what happens when risk and reward sort of go to an area where the risk is outweighing the reward somewhat, I think is probably fair to say. But before we get into the details of that, just want to note, right, 25 years in this industry that we've known each other.
Yeah.
What is your favourite data centre memory?
Oh gosh, what's a favourite? Oh gosh, that's the way. Maybe the launch party for Terraco in Johannesburg, where it's the first data center I knew that had a bar in it, inside the data center, and that was a very, very funny launch party we had. Yeah, lots of fond memories of that one. Excellent,
and again another successful venture that you've got under your belt, because. During those 25 years, you're very, very well known across the industry as a data center operator, owner, investor, entrepreneur, philanthropist. I suppose a bit like me, we just get bored really easily and have to move on to the next thing.
Unfortunately.
But everything you've worked with has worked very well, from the initial IX Europe set up and then being sold off to Equinix, etc. So just give us a brief rundown for anyone who doesn't know you in your career, I don't think there's many out there, of what you've done over the past quarter of a century.
So I guess, I mean, the story starts, I did engineering at Oxford Brookes now, and I thought I need to learn a language to add a bit to that, because it's not, at the time it wasn't considered the best degree or whatever. So I went to Paris and worked with Philips and wrote software, and I was writing assembly language. And then in the end realised I wasn't a very good programmer, and then eventually morphed into sales, and then morphed into telecoms in Hungary with Vivendi Group, big French company, building a sort of a telecoms network post-Eastern European wall, collapse. And then that brought me back to the UK. The company I was working for was sold, and during that process I was kind of in a backwater in sunny Slough, and started thinking, well, I might as well start my own business then. And so back in 97, Telehouse had gone down for half an hour in the UK, and that meant the internet was off in the UK for half an hour, but nobody cared. But I thought, well, in 5 years' time, Goldman Sachs will be doing some sort of Forex transaction and they'll lose $50 million because there's no internet. So I thought we should have a West London data center. So I proposed we did one in Slough, but the board, at that time, they were selling the company, so then that company was sold. But then during this process of sort of integration with the new owners, I was in this backwater in Slough, and I spent 6 months trying to sort of work out a business plan, and started IX Europe with a French friend of mine, Christophe Deboucher, who was much more sensible than me. So he had me, the sort of mad dog, sales, business development, engineering, and him, finance, operations, structure. And then we brought in Sir Anthony Cleaver, who was a chairman of one of the Vivendi companies I was working with, and I thought, well, let's ask him. So we asked him, and if I look at pictures of myself then, I think, how the hell would you give money to that guy? He looks about 18 years old. And
we were all a lot younger then, in fairness.
We were, and it was amazing. It was amazing. So he joined as chairman, and then we were off to the races. And then, of course, we had a minor issue of the dot-com bubble bursting, and 75% of our competition going bankrupt. So maybe it was during that period that I got a taste for doing the impossible. I don't know.
Yeah, but I
wanted hard. I wanted difficult stuff.
Yeah, a sentence that you've just come up with has just resonated with that. The internet went down and no one cared. And for anybody sort of under the age of 40 that's watching this now, I mean, they'll be sitting there going, what you on about? What do you mean nobody cared? But obviously in those days, the internet was a toy more than anything else. But to have the foresight to realise that actually this would be running our lives, and all of those critical business areas is quite extraordinary, really.
Yeah. And I guess there are people sort of 35 like I was then today looking at AI and thinking, well, we need to do this, this and this. And people don't believe them because they don't think AI is going to take our lives over. So yeah, it's the same.
Yeah. So IX Europe, very successful, survived the .com crash.
Managed to survive, bought some distressed asset, floated on the secondary market in the UK, sold to Equinix, and again, short span of attention. Equinix were lovely, really nice, but I thought, I need to do something different now. So then I sort of left, so did Christoph, we both left the company. And pretty much immediately, Tim Parsonson contacted me from Terraco in South Africa and said, you want to join the board and invest some money? And I thought, why am I investing in data centers? I'm not sure about this. Anyway, I put quite a lot of money in, joined the board, and that was 2008 to 2014, and when we exited to Permira at the time. During that time, I was sort of faffing around. My wife complains because she said you spent 2 years sort of finding yourself. So I had this office in the 16th century sort of palace next to the Thames in Fulham. Thinking about life, and during that period I was approached by EBRD, European Bank, to work on a Russia project, and I thought that sounds fun. I'd never been to Russia, so I sort of developed that and went to the meeting, and they said, well, actually we're not funding it in the end, we're doing something else. And I thought, I might as well go to Moscow anyway. So I went to Moscow to meet the founder, an English guy. I hadn't seen him on Zoom or anything like that. Zoom didn't exist then. Anyway.
I don't think it did. That was a COVID thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. So this is 2010, I think. Maybe 2008, 2009 probably. And so I heard him, and he had a sort of mid-Atlantic accent. English guy brought up in the US, played in a rock group who toured the US or whatever, and then decided to join Autodesk as like the 8th employee as a programmer as well. So he was an engineer too. And he'd given me a rendezvous in the TGI Fridays in Moscow. So I was in this TGI Fridays, having schlepped across from London to Moscow. And this guy turns up in this TGI Fridays, and he looks like Bono, and he's got sort of leather trousers and a leather jacket and multicolour sunglasses and a spiky haircut. And I'm thinking, I've got to spend a day here. Why the hell am I here? I want to go back to the airport now. What's the point? And after about 3 minutes of sitting down, I realised that him dressed completely off the wall, this crazy rocker, was the sensible finance operations guy, and I was the crazy, in my suit, which I put a suit on, was the mad business development guy. So actually we clicked very, very quickly. And I thought, yeah, okay, we can fund this. So I said, look, I'm going to join you and I'll bring the money, and then, you've got the plan. And I recut the plan. It was too complicated, so I made it simpler. It was all very exciting, and at that time, Russia was a friend. They were good, nice people, and we were trying to do business with them. The wall had come down; it was all optimistic, and so I started trying to find money. It was difficult to find money, and in the end, Tim Parsonson, the guy from South Africa, said, "Oh, there's the World Bank, IFC, International Finance Corporation, who are in Moscow at the moment. You should have dinner with them." So just so happened they were all their infrastructure guys or telecoms guys. So I had dinner with them, and I said, look, I can't find anybody. And they said, oh, we'll do it. We'll finance it. So that's where all that started. So I knew nothing about Russia, never been to Russia in my life, knew a bit of Eastern Europe from Hungary, 3 years in Hungary, but that was it. So I knew nothing about this. But I felt that it was an interesting project. It was an exciting project. IFC was interested in investing in, democratizing infrastructure in telecoms or whatever. And so I thought, yeah, why not? Let's do this.
Go for it.
Yeah, let's go for it. So we went for it. And of course, whenever you go for it in these projects like that, it always takes 3 times as long as you think it will. So it was a long and painful journey. And we got it going. And I was doing this from London. I was going out every 6 weeks for a few days. Don't speak Russian. Still don't speak Russian. We got the money. We started building. And
can I just go, getting the money, the appetite then, so obviously there were some hurdles to overcome, but as we know, in terms of investment into our sector, and as much as it wasn't the hot ticket it is now, it was quietly bubbling under.
It was.
So was there a lot of appetite from the investors, regardless of the risk, into investing into somewhere like Russia? Was it an easy process?
No, it was not an easy process, and that's why we had the IFC, who are kind of your lender of last resort, so to speak. So, whilst my friends were starting up data center businesses in Europe and the US, and reasonably successfully raising money, I was scrabbling away trying to raise money for my crazy mad thing in Russia. So I didn't have commercial investment first of all. It was IFC. So it was a struggle to get moving.
But you weren't. So obviously you'd already had a business in South Africa, which, although not probably as risky as maybe the perception of Russia even at that time was, it's still on the risk index is still. So you'd already done something successful somewhere that.
And IFC was an investor in the South African business as well. Yeah.
And it all went very well for a while, didn't it, with the Russia business? And you did manage to get appetite from investors down the line.
It was a typical Russian journey with a massive ups and massive downs. And so we had massive ups where we got the money from IFC. We started building. And you got to be really careful in these countries because people come up to you and say, if you give me $30,000, I can bring you this kind of client and stuff like that. So you have to say, well, if you write that down as a receipt, I'll bring it to IFC. I'm sure they won't mind. So people sort of having IFC was great because it's like having 18-year-old brother at the corner of the playground. So that was helpful. But we got through. We started developing. But my poor founder, who was this rock and roll guy, lovely, charming guy, best friend was Rudolf Schenker from the Scorpions. He died of a heart attack at the age of 53 in the middle of in the middle of the project. So we had to sort of pick up the pieces and see what we do next.
Obviously, dealing with investors, and both of us do that on a regular basis, it's that whole risk versus reward, and your higher rewards are always aligned with higher risks.
Allegedly. That's
Allegedly.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the things we often get asked on our consultancy side, or when we talk, certainly at conferences or panels with the investor community, is that it tends to sort of get pushed to one side a little bit in terms of, well, will it be fine? These things really don't. So long as we've mitigated against it, whether it's through insurance, whether it's through doing your due diligence, we'll just go ahead anyway.
Yeah.
But we're living in very complicated times now.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you see a lot in the news about, certainly from data centers, things like supply chain.
Yeah.
You get a lot of the backing, but all of those can be got round.
Yeah.
It might take longer,
It
might cost more money, but they're not a game changer when it comes to the business. Your situation was slightly different with the Russia. Do you want to talk us through going from that wonderful scenario to what then happened?
I mean, that wonderful scenario got, so the beginning was difficult because we couldn't find commercial investors. We then got IFC in, then we got Sumitomo Corporation from Japan who joined us. And then Sumitomo decided they weren't going to invest anymore. And the guy from Sumitomo, who's a lovely, lovely guy, said it was being sent back to Japan. And he said, I'm not going back to Japan until I found another commercial investor for you. And so he brought in Goldman Sachs because they'd done a lot of work with them before. He said to them, look, you should really talk to these guys. So Goldman Sachs joined us as an investor. So now we had 3 institutional investors. And they were fantastic. And we expanded the business. And, we're going through difficult times because Crimea had already been invaded by that time. So, things were looking a little bit dicey. But we still had a business to run. We still had to carry on. And then things calmed down. Things seemed to be going very well. And then we had another funding round, a very big funding round, where PIMCO and Mubadala joined us as well. So now we had 5 institutional investors. And I was sitting in London at Goldman Sachs' offices pushing the button on an IPO, a NASDAQ IPO, as you do. And a few weeks later, the war started, and that was it. Everything was out. So So it kind of started difficult, exciting but difficult, got really successful, and then suddenly, bam, the whole thing. And then suddenly, everything's closed down, you can't do anything, and how can you complain? What right do you have to complain about losing everything if people are losing their lives, and there's a whole sort of civil war going on and stuff like that. So, it was very difficult. And obviously with, Russia was sanctioned, a whole bunch of it. So you basically have a massive plate glass war between me in the business now can't do anything to be involved in that business anymore.
And I said that this was why I was so excited to be able to talk to you about this in an interview or it's a fireside chat, but there's no fireside, so a boardroom chat area, because we very, very rarely see the positives when something goes right in these areas. What you don't see are people talking about what happens when it does go wrong, both from the business side and also from the personal and emotional side. Yeah. Because that must have had a huge impact to have worked on something, got it to a stage, and then through no fault of your own, it's suddenly to be cut off.
Yeah, and you have this sort of thing where you say, I was going to sell down some of my shares, so I was thinking, but I'm not counting on it, and then suddenly when that doesn't happen, you realise you were counting on it. Yeah. And you had this whole sort of house of cards, and I had a son studying in the US, and I had a mortgage in the UK and stuff like that, and suddenly you're kind of a normal person again, and your bank account's getting draining down, and you begin to panic, and it's, but luckily, I remember talking to my lawyer friend, and he said, Guy, don't worry, you'll do something else, you're always doing new stuff, so it'll be fine. And in fact, it was fine, it all picked up very well. I started doing work in Europe, with PIMCO, where we launched Apto, the big sort of data center platform. And then I had started, knowing that emerging markets are a little bit dicey sometimes, I'd started a business in Kenya a few years before, in about 2019, as kind of a hedge, and Helios Investment Partners had decided to invest in that, and that happened just after the whole Russia thing mess up. So that helped me. And then Helios came in and said, well, hey, why don't you help us with digital infrastructure across Africa? And I said, well, I don't really know Africa very well. And they said, well, if you can build a data center in Moscow...
This is sounding familiar, Guy.
Yeah. If you could build one in Moscow, you could probably do anywhere in Africa. And they're lovely, lovely guys here. It's really fun. And again, Helios is also connected with the IFCs and the EBRDs of the world and stuff like that. So it's in that same world I'm in.
Feel free to skirt over anything or to not answer with all of this. But in terms of, I'm not sure many people would understand what the process is. So when something like that happens in Russia, you've obviously got your investors there. You've gone through all of your stages. You've got Goldman Sachs involved. Yeah. What happens with those investors? What happens when you're in that situation?
The tricky thing is there is no process. So, countries that have been sanctioned around the world, Pakistan was sanctioned by the United Nations. And, obviously the US has sanctions on goodness knows how many countries these days. But there is no process. So, unfortunately, the private entrepreneur is the collateral damage in a lot of these things. So, the government will say, well, hey, I'm sorry about that. It's risk and reward. And what you do find sometimes is actually the reward is quite a lot less than the risk. So it is a tricky world to be in when you're outside that. That's why it's good to be with an IFC or something like that. But even so, it's tricky. But, it's very exciting. It's a very lively place outside the mainstream, if you like.
Yeah. And it's great, it's to have taken on something that no one else is doing and to throw yourself into it wholeheartedly.
That's right.
But that's one, and anyone that knows you'll know this, you do throw yourself into anything that you're doing, 110%.
That's right.
What was the emotional impacts of all of this? Because to suddenly sort of build something up like that,
oh, massive.
I know from a business perspective you had other things, but the emotional side of it.
No, massive. I mean, when I started my first business, I was looking for a chairman, and I came across this old gin and tonic brigade sort of chap. I don't know who put me in touch with him. Anyway, he said, meet me at my club in St James's. So I met him. He said, bring your wife along. So, right, okay. So I said to my wife, right, you're coming along. She said, okay, I'll come along. And he looked at her and he said, do you know what your husband's getting you into? And he was very nice, actually. What he was saying is, your husband's going to be doing a startup. This is going to be all consuming. Are you ready for that sort of thing? So we agreed with my wife that I'd do that, and it wasn't a garage startup, it was in the bedroom, I was doing all the business planning or whatever, but we did that. That was IX Europe back in the day in 99. When I exited IX Europe in 2008, and I was in my sort of palace, office, whatever, I got kind of sucked into the Russian project. And I didn't tell my wife that, oh, by the way, most of the money that I've made in Europe is now in Moscow. And and she's right to say that, it's fine. I agreed with you for the Europe thing. I didn't agree with you to go into this Russian thing. So when I came, to her and said, well, actually, it's kind of it's on pause. I may have lost everything. It may get confiscated. Who knows? It was hard for her as well, because she was saying, why the hell did you do this in the first place? And I think one of the problems with crazy mad dog entrepreneurs is when they make a bit of money, they forget that it took them 10 years to make it, so they can fritter it away fairly quickly or throw it onto some unlikely project. Yeah. And I think, somebody slapped me in the face a bit more in 2008. I would have been a bit more careful, because in the Russian business, IFC was coming in, and typically IFC always goes in with an industrial partner, with a Schneider or an Alcatel or something like that. And they had to sort of bend the rules to consider me as an industrial partner. But as a result, I had to kind of match some of their investments. And we did, 3 rounds. And so, I was sucking in. So, very, very tough for my wife to sort of say, oh, that's, it's nice, but you didn't even ask if you could do this sort of thing. And a really tough time for me for 6 months. Really, really tough. Very strange range of feelings. The first feeling is total euphoria, because what you are completely paranoid about, and the team, and there's 130 people and all this sort of day-to-day and all this stuff, suddenly it's just been blown to pieces. Yeah. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it does, but there's nothing you can do anymore. And so the euphoria is a bit like you've been disconnected from reality. You're kind of out there. You have no responsibilities anymore, because there's nothing you can do that's going to affect anything. You're totally helpless, basically. And so you get this sort of euphoria, well, that doesn't matter, it's fine. And then the reality starts setting in with, the bills coming in and the bank account slipping down, and thinking, well, shit, how do I sort all this out? And that's really hard. But then once you've been in the industry for so long, as you know as much as I do, the phone calls start coming in, or the WhatsApps or the emails saying, oh, by the way, I noticed maybe you might be free to help us on this or that and the other.
But what are your confidence with that? Because obviously, in the run-up to that, with IX Europe, then with Terra, these successes, and then something again, not through any fault of anything you've done business-wise, this has gone. What about your confidence with feeling like you could do this again?
I was feeling, do I have the energy to ever do this again? I really don't want to do this again, because it's, building a data center business from a sheet of paper to an IPO is not easy. It's a 10-year process, basically. So, you're in for the long haul. But I had kind of started that in Kenya anyway. And to start the business in Kenya we've only just been going for a year now, in 2025, but I actually started looking at it in 2018. So it was a long sort of thought process and, connection process before we actually got to that. So, so I don't know. So, I guess I was I just didn't know what to do, really, I think. And you get that feeling that, you're a bit of a failure and you sort of messed up, and then suddenly people start contacting you and you think, oh, maybe I'm not such a failure, and maybe this failure is a really good experience and I can really apply that.
And back to that being a good experience, I mean, I know it's awful, like you say, a war, people losing their lives, people losing livelihoods with all of this. But has it helped in your personal growth, having gone through that and having something so spectacularly taken
I think
away?
so. To me, there's this thing about, you want to make your millions and millions and whatever, and I remember saying to my wife, I'm really sorry, I've sort of kind of messed up, the whole thing's lost, I don't know if we'll ever get our money out of this thing. And I was thinking we could get a really nice house in the south of France, and my wife was very, sort of pragmatic about it. So there's always a bigger house. There's always something bigger. You do what you can with what you've got, and we're okay. So I think it is that it's only money, and I think that's really come home, to me.
And your spirit obviously hasn't been dampened, because you're doing it all over again.
Yeah, I'm still mad. So but then we had a situation where the business in Kenya was almost sold last year, and that was an interesting deal, and then it fell through because there's a new CEO in the company that was buying it, whatever. So these things happen. But now I thought maybe that's a sort of message to me to get closer to one of my projects again, and I had been missing that, because being involved in South Africa and Russia and Kenya from London was sort of all vicarious. I wasn't actually living it, and I do love that operator thing. So I thought, why don't I just go and live above the shop for a couple of years? So I promised my wife, who's French, that we go back to Paris after like 29 years in London. And I said, well, actually, we will go back, but if we just do a short detour just over there in Kenya for a couple of years. So
you've been very lucky in your marriage, haven't you?
Yeah, she's come round. She realised. I think she realised I was mad when she married me. But yeah, we'll be there for 2 years, and then we'll be moving to France. But that sort of living above the shop thing, it's very invigorating, very exciting. Very exciting.
And when you're a certain type of person, that's where your passion and everything else comes from. So, the whole point of the series I'm doing at the moment is on that geopolitical risk side. Obviously, you've not been put off taking those risks because the areas you're working in at the moment are probably, on paper, if not quite as risky, they've certainly got risk factors there.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to anyone in the same position?
It's better having a good management team with a bad idea than a bad management team with a good idea. Yeah. So basically, if you've got a good management team and difficult things happen, they'll work it through. If you've got a bad management team and difficult things happen, you've lost everything. Yeah. So it's all about the team and who's in that team and what their resilience is and what sort of knocks they've had, in the past and how they pull through. That's number one. I think you have to accept that emerging markets are hard. It's especially in this data center market, which is very, very frothy at the moment. It means that it's very easier in the Western markets, Southeast Asia, Western markets, to really do something quite meaningful. And the amounts are absolutely sky high. I was talking to Madonna Park at Switch, last year, and she said, we raised $11 billion in debt.
It's silly money, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. Switch is doing very, very well. They've got very big customers, very big company. But whereas if you go into the emerging markets, the difference is quite stark. Potentially in other industries, that imbalance is maybe less than it is in the data center market. But emerging markets can be a bit of a drug in the sense that you'll meet people who've been in emerging markets all their lives and they just like difficult.
It's your equivalent of skydiving, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. It's kind of an extreme sport. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And any advice to anyone that finds themselves in a similar position as an entrepreneur, where things go wrong? What would your advice be then? Well,
hopefully, I would wish for them not to be on their own for a start, because the last thing you want to be is on your own in these things. So you never really want to, I would never want to start a company on my own. I'd always want to start it with 1, 2, 3 people. So we're sharing the load, because nobody can take that. Yeah. Everything just blows apart then. So, make sure you're not on your own. But I think you have to have the confidence just to move on and just remember, money is just here today, gone tomorrow, or whatever,
And a very sympathetic other half.
Yeah, nobody's going to write on my gravestone, he built a great data center in Johannesburg or whatever. No, I don't think that. Nobody cares about that. So, of course, family is really important, and I've got 5 children, and that keeps me busy enough. But I think getting that balance right is right. There's some people around the world who seem to have got the balance, very right. Bevan Slattery in Australia seems to have got that balance. Yeah. And I like Bevan because Bevan's kind of the antithesis of what I've been doing, in the sense that he's done everything in Australia, kind of for Australia, and you say, I'm building this fibre network because the Australians need this. Yeah. I'm building these undersea cables because the Australians need it. And I love that story, whereas I'm doing everything outside, wherever I'm from, all the time, which dilutes things a lot to a certain extent. But then, it's what I like. But it's
exciting. And again, it's about fitting into your personality and what gets you up in the mornings as well. That's right. Which I can't imagine you having sat here in London for the last 25 years and just built data centres in London.
No, that's the thing.
It's not you.
No, I couldn't have done it. But, it can be very exciting as well. That's the thing. I think you can get overexcited by the sort of glamour of emerging markets and how difficult they are. But I must admit, Kenya, I've been there since April. And, the first couple of weeks I was thinking, why the hell am I here, sort of thing, because I didn't really know Africa that well. And after 2 weeks I was thinking, I'm loving this. This is fantastic. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Well, the industry has been all the richer for having had you in it. Thank goodness you accidentally, did all of us of a certain age, none of us had data centres as a career plan.
No,
thank goodness you accidentally ended up in the industry and have carried on doing what you're doing, because again, it makes life a lot more interesting. So long may you continue, and I look forward to what you're doing next. I'm so grateful for you having this chat with us today. Really,
the nice
really appreciate
thing is that, I see a lot of the people who I had as interns back 20 years ago now running businesses, in Brazil, in Canada, in Europe or whatever, and they're now like CEOs, and that's fantastic, because you need to keep the generations going. And I think the more recent conferences, I've seen a lot more young people. I was getting worried it was all getting a bit grey haired, but no, it's actually there's a lot of young people moving in, which is great. I think because next wave.
Exactly. As much as it makes me feel older every time I go, because in my head I'm still 26. As are you. We've never got any older in 25 years.
No,
but
that's right.
exciting times ahead. Guy, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Nicola Hayes with Guy Willner for Platform Insight.
Thank you.